Okay, waiting for Facebook here. There we go. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to History Matters, and so does coffee. Um, there are some weeks when not often that I have nothing to talk about. I mean, there's always something given our, sort of news climate. There's some weeks where I have to pick between one or two things. This has been an insane week. And we're going to only talk about part of it, or at least I'm going to talk about part of it, and then we'll see where we go in the Q&A portion. But before I even begin to try to address the last few days, I turn to my partner in crime, Annie, who will explain the rules of the game.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Annie Evans from New American History. I am delighted, as I always am on Fridays, to be with you. We have folks tuning in from Facebook, folks here on Zoom. The chat is already on fire. But what we hope you will do is, as you're listening, please add questions about today's topic down below in the Q&A. I'll be back in about 30 minutes, and Joanne will answer some of our questions. So see you in a little bit.
Okay. So, the theme I ended up going with is history is happening for today's episode partly because I just can't believe the cluster of things that have happened in a relatively short amount of time. Really, it's a little mind blowing. I mean, so today is July 26th. I think it's July 13th that there was the shooting at Donald Trump's rally. Okay, so that's not 2 weeks ago. We've had the Republican convention. We had the selection of J.D. Vance for vice president. Then we had the president deciding that he's not going to run for a second term. Then we had Kamala Harris being chosen as the candidate. And then we had the last 3 or 4 days of amazing outpouring in response to that announcement. That's a lot of stuff to happen in, I don't know, a little over a week. That's a lot. That's a lot. And it's not small potatoes stuff, right? It's big stuff. I mean, Biden, President Biden deciding not to run for a second term. And I'm going to talk a little bit about men not normally surrendering power, particularly, but why this in particular was historic, certainly in some ways precedent setting. I don't even have to say how historic it is to have a Black South Asian woman now seemingly the nominee for the Democratic president of the United States. And we'll wait to see about the convention. That's yet another topic because it's going to be, in a sense, an open convention. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff for anyone to talk about. So let's talk a little bit first. We're going to zero in on all of the history setting things. Let's talk first about President Biden's decision not to run for a second term. Now, I've said here many times before, I hesitate to say something is unprecedented because as a historian, I tell my students this too. Almost inevitably, someone will come forward and say, unprecedented, really? Really? Like, here are 5 other examples, and then you feel silly, even if they don't quite match. But there are aspects of this decision on the part of Biden that are unprecedented, largely the closeness to the convention and the actual election. Come back to that momentarily. But the fact of the matter is, in the long haul of, American history and American presidents, there have been some who have decided not to run for a second term. Again, usually not this late in the game. Sometimes they just decide they're not even going to jump in and seek another term. And sometimes it's because of some actual fact, like LBJ in 1968, and Vietnam causing a lot of division, and his popularity wasn't high, and he decides he's not going to run for re-election. Harry Truman, in 1952, deciding he's not going to run again. In his case, seemingly the Korean War is helping with that. His popularity is dropping, so he decides not to run. There are other presidents who have decided not to seek another term. Um, and this, when I'm going to redo the list of presidents and then tell you what it reminds me of. Calvin Coolidge, James K. Polk, James Buchanan, Rutherford B. Hayes, and Theodore Roosevelt. Now, with the exception of Theodore Roosevelt, I don't know how many Simpsons fans there are out here, but I can't resist. There's an episode I watched sporadically, and there was an episode about the forgotten presidents. Someone out here will know the details, and I don't have chat open, so I can't see it. But there's an episode where there's a school play going on, and they're singing in honor of all of the average presidents, the forgotten presidents, and it's all like, Polk, Buchanan, Hayes. So that string of people, that's what was in my mind this morning. Regardless of that, all of the cases that I've mentioned are people who, at an earlier point than what we just saw, decided for one reason or another, and often because of unpopularity, and often that unpopularity is centered around, for example, a war. That's been part of what led to these decisions. What we saw this last week was a president, and we can certainly talk in the Q&A about the process of this. In the points I want to make now, I'm not going to talk about, was he pushed out? Did he opt out? What I am going to say now is that regardless of what you think led to that decision, he decided to not run for reelection. That was his decision. And you could see that if you watched his statement. I think it was only 11 minutes long, to the nation from the Oval Office. I think, it came across as a very sincere statement. He acknowledged he was putting aside his own ambition. He kind of suggested, he kind of had wanted to finish the job, but it's time for a newer generation to finish the job that he began. It was clear that that was a very hard decision for him to make. And again, at this very late point, and again, regardless of what the constant onslaught of attacking his abilities in recent weeks had done, he's deciding not to do this with all of that sort of floating around in the atmosphere behind him for a lot of reasons. This was a very difficult decision for him, and I think you could really see that in his statement. But the simple fact that basically he was the nominee, he already, the convention, the Democratic convention is what, like 2 weeks away, I think. I even have the date here. It's like August 20th, 19 to 22. Okay. So very close. And at that late point, he makes this decision. That was striking, and that was historic, in part not simply because he decided not to go for a second term. I just listed a bunch of other people who made that decision, but because he's doing it at a moment of crisis. Not the same thing as saying there's a war and I'm unpopular and I'm deciding not to run for a second term, but rather democracy is in crisis. It is. And he decided at this moment, regardless of what he wanted or what he wanted to do, that for the good of the nation and for the preservation of democracy, he would not run again. That deserves attention. That, in a way, is very telling about precisely where we are. It's a unprecedented in when you put it all together as an act, how late it is, the reason why it happened, and all of that together really epitomizes precisely where we are right now in American political history. So years from now, assuming we still have historians, they will look at that moment, not only because it's a historic moment, but they will look at the way it happened, what led to it, what happened afterwards, and what he said about why he was doing it as a real indication of precisely what the mood and the reality, the ugly reality of American politics is right now. It was striking, and I can't resist saying, personal statement. I don't normally do this. I wait for the after party, but it just felt it's going to segue right into the next thing I want to talk about. I happened to be at the gym with friends at the time when Biden was going to make his announcement, and I was going to like rush home, and then one of my friends, I was there with 3 other friends, had the brilliant idea of figuring out how to turn the volume up on the TV at the gym. So we watched this. There are 4 of us. We watched this in a line. We pulled all of the chairs over from the hair drying stations in the locker room and sat in the middle of the locker room in a row, looking up at the TV and watched that moment. And, I met these women at the gym 10, 12 years ago. We've gone through a lot of things nationally, never mind personally, politically. We've seen so much in that time period. And for us to be there together as women in that moment, witnessing that together, um, in the locker room, at a gym where women work out. The whole thing just felt to me weirdly symbolic. And it's one of those moments that I will, of course, remember and think back on as epitomizing a moment for me. But part of the reason I tell that story and make that segue, of course, is the other part of what we've been seeing just for the last few days has truly been remarkable. I mean, really remarkable. So the announcement that Kamala Harris now is getting Biden's endorsement to be the new candidate, that in and of itself, a Black South Asian woman is now seemingly going to be the candidate for the Democratic Party. That's all by itself historic and mind-blowing, with a Jewish husband. Throw that in there too. That's all by itself is kind of mind-blowing. But the national response to that has been stunning. Stunning in the sense that enormous. I mean, the atmosphere has entirely changed as far as the election is concerned. The mood, the dynamics, the outlook, the terrain, the convention, a lot has happened in a handful of days. If you think about it, it's been such a brief chunk of time since that announcement was made. And I believe, if I remember correctly, I don't have chat open, so people can't correct me yet, that in the first day that she was announced as running for this, that she raised $80 million. I think that was the figure. And I want to talk briefly about why I think this is happening the way it is. And then I want to open things up and talk a little bit about men deciding to or not deciding to give up power, and women of different kinds, not just Kamala Harris, gaining power, and what this says about our current political moment. But here's what I think, in part, about what we're seeing now, because it's been like an emotional outburst. And I realize that as a woman and as a liberal woman, I've been feeling this perhaps more than some other people have been. I went online, as I always do before this morning, to kind of get a read on what people were saying about this moment. And as luck would have it, I came across a handful of male pundits, talking about this moment. And almost all of them said, in one way or another, wow, this is really something, and it's going to end really soon. Boy, this is really quite striking. There's no way it's going to last. And maybe that's true. I don't know. But it struck me that these male pundits didn't quite have a read on the power of this moment. It might last another week and then fade away. It might be that the right will figure out a way to attack Kamala Harris. Well, I'm going to come back to that because that's problematic for a whole bunch of reasons for the Republicans. But I think some of what we've been watching, and again, I really want to hear from you in the Q&A session as to what you're thinking. But what it felt like to me, generally speaking, is particularly in this campaign, but not just in this campaign, but in Supreme Court decisions and any number of other things in semi-recent years. As a matter of fact, many of you know who normally come here, I was right here talking to you when the decision about Roe came down. So we all found that out live together. So women in that semi-recent cluster of years have been feeling stomped on and pulled back and repressed and suppressed and considered less than in a lot of different ways. And my sense of this has been that, again, as someone who speaks a lot in public or speaks a lot online, very often the response is, okay, so now what do we do? And, we talk about speaking up and being loud and getting active, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There was the Women's March. I took part in the Women's March, and the press largely ignored it, right? So if people were feeling like we need to get out in the streets and march, I'm sure that a lot of people thought, well, a lot of good that's going to do because it's not going to get any attention. So what? So it feels to me that there was a lot of pent up anger and emotion, um, partly over what's been happening in recent years, partly, I think, without necessarily even thinking about it, by women who voted for Hillary Clinton, hoping that there would be a woman president, hopeful that there would be the first woman president. I went to the polling place with a neighbor. She had her daughter there. She wanted her daughter with her when she voted for the first woman president. So that was a moment. And what happened in that election, I think, scarred people. So you put all of that together, the fact that women are being stomped on politically, the fact that there's a bunch of women now who have been through before the hope of maybe having a woman as president. You put all of that into this moment, and then you have a figure, Kamala Harris, who embodies in spirit and in her policies and the things that she supports. She becomes a voice. She became a voice for all kinds of people, right? Black Americans, white Americans, women, particularly women in this moment. And so part of what I think we're experiencing is an outpouring of released frustration and anger from women who finally feel that there's someone with power potentially representing them. So I think that's she transformed the election, but I think that's what she uncapped. And that's, I tuned in for a little while to the, I can't even remember what the name of it was, but it was basically white women for Kamala Harris. I think at one point there were over 100,000 people on Zoom. I think by the time I got there were 80,000 people. They raised millions of dollars. They've had huge numbers of people. It was Black women for Kamala Harris. I think it was Black men for Kamala Harris. People stepping forward. In the white women for Harris conversation, there were white women acknowledging things that white women have done in the past as far as not really supporting the rights of women and people of color. So it wasn't just, aren't we great, but it was actually a sort of wrestling with the past and what needs to happen now. But my larger point here is the phenomenon that we're seeing now. I'm a historian. I'm not going to predict what happens, but I will say that the male pundits who are like, well, this will last another day or two and then it's going to go, I think are underestimating, as ever, the degree to which women have this pent up anger and need to voice their rights, their equality in our political system, in our democracy. Now, what's interesting, and we don't know how this is going to play out, right? So somehow, and to me, somewhat oddly, the right, the Trump team seems to have not prepared for the possibility of this moment. And I don't know if that's true. It feels that way. And if that is the case, in and of itself, that's strange. I don't know, if they actually thought maybe they couldn't conceive of the fact that a president would surrender power, given that their leading candidate tried to hang on to power beyond when he should have. I don't know if they assumed that whoever was chosen would not be Kamala Harris. I can't speak with any knowledge about that. But the fact of the matter is, they seem to have been caught off guard. And the ways in which initially they're swatting back are all problematic, right? I mean, I read, I guess, that the Speaker of the House has been telling people in the House to not sound so racist. Right? I believe that's what I read. I'm not going to vouch for it. Again, I can't see chat. Some of you can find that if that is true, but what I heard was that he was saying, "Come on, guys, like stop sounding so racist." So if you attack Kamala Harris on the question of race, if you're racist, you're saying a lot about the Republican Party that isn't new information, but it means whatever they're saying is not a free and easy insult. It comes with baggage. Same thing goes about attacking her for being a woman and incompetent. The whole thing about Kamala Harris's laugh. That, again, on a personal level, and I know there's a lot of women listening right now who feel the same way. Um, Throughout my career as a political historian, particularly an early American political historian, I've very often been the only woman in the room, the only woman speaking to a group of people. And I cannot tell you the number of times that I've had people tell me, either in person or more recently online, they watch my American Revolution course online, and then they go through the trouble to contact me and tell me that I should stop cackling. And that's the word they use. That sort of, you know, sexist, gendered, witchy, stop cackling, you laugh too much. Um, that all by itself, I think initially once or twice I would respond and say, "I'm so sorry, I'm joyful in my teaching." Like, boy, you go find someone who's boring and doesn't laugh. But personally, I take joy in what I do. But that attack also, it's already kind of backfiring. So the ways in which, traditionally speaking, the right has been attacking candidates like Barack Obama, is this person really black? Where's this person really from? All of these things. In one way or another, they're sort of being tested out. I think I said yesterday online, spaghetti meat wall. Like they're just trying anything out to see what sticks. The interesting baggage here is that almost any attempt that they make has a lot of baggage that just exposes the Republican MAGA folk for who they are. And some people like that, for sure. I mean, that's obviously true. But what that means is that these attacks have serious baggage attached to them, and that's going to make this complicated. Again, not predicting any outcomes, but that makes this particularly interesting. So, I suppose I'll conclude here. We're almost at the moment when I want to conclude. I'll conclude by saying what we saw this last week and what we are watching and continue to see. So keep your eyes peeled, folks. Keep watching. What we saw was a kind of, um, I'm going to say this, and I know someone's going to swat back at me, and that's okay. We'll have that kind of discussion afterwards. But I want to say what we saw was a kind of tribute to democracy in the sense that a candidate took the read on things and decided to step down. And what I think some people will say is he was pushed out, and that's not democratic, and Kamala Harris is being imposed on us, and that's not democratic. We could talk about that during the Q&A period. But still, we had the president of the United States decide not to run, which opened the system to go into operation, our democratic political system of government. Someone else was endorsed by the president and by many, many other people. People are coming forward to express what they feel about that. All of that said, there will now be essentially an open convention where there will be, I assume, a roll call vote, and we will see what happens. It's hard to conceive that Kamala Harris isn't going to be the candidate, but hey, history is nothing if unpredictable. But in essence, all of that, our system operating, our system working, something just updated on my computer. Sorry, folks. Our system operating, our system working as it's supposed to work. We're watching that happen. And then in the response, we're watching Americans in real time voice what they feel about it, step forward and say they support it. I've said here countless, countless times that public opinion matters in our form of government, that when the United States was created and the world was a world of monarchies, one of the distinctive things about the United States was that to greater degree than any of those monarchies, public opinion mattered. They talked about it all the time, the founding generation. Weren't absolutely sure who the public was, had a pretty confined idea who the public was, but they understood that it mattered. They didn't know how to figure out who it was or what they thought. I've written all kinds of things in my past work about trying to figure out what the public thinks. But the essence of that fact is that the public matters in our form of government. We forget that sometimes as the public, at our own peril. We forget that our will and our voice matter. And in a sense, that's another part of the sort of democratic moment that we're having here, is the public voice is being, at least some of the public voice is being very, very loud. And that's part of the democratic process as well. I'm actually 1 minute early. I think that's where I'm going to stop. I have all kinds of notes here about other things that I was going to say, but I can talk during the Q&A about like other presidents who had the kind of welcome that Kamala Harris has had as a candidate. I don't want to take up time because I think we have a lot to talk about. Yes, mug. Okay, so let me explain for folks who are here for the first time what happens next. So this is our I already forgot, 226th episode. Yes?
Yes, 226. Yep.
226. And every week I have a mug that relates in some way to what we're talking about. And sometimes I take people on a long trip with me into figuring out what the connection is. But this week, I think it's really pretty easy.
Yes.
We are at a historic moment in all kinds of ways. Here's one. So that wasn't a hard choice for today, that there's a Black South Asian woman who is running as to be the nominee of one of our two main parties. That's mind-blowing. So anyway, that's that. Oh, and Carolee has a matching mug. Well, it came from an NCHE conference, actually. So
I have it somewhere. I'm not sure where it is now.
Right. I bet a lot of us have that mug. Anyway, so that's the thematic mug for today. But let's open things. There's so much to talk about. And I'm going to try my best here to answer some of it. But this is unfolding so quickly in real time that I'm probably not even caught up with everything that's been happening just in the last day or two. So, okay, I'm going to open chat so I can see everyone here.
Okay, it is flying off the hook. Okay, so we have lots of great questions. We have one from Henry Wilson. Henry, have you been with us before? I don't remember you being in the Q&A, but he wanted to know, is whether or not Biden is remembered as a modern day Cincinnatus dependent on the outcome of the election?
Meaning, I guess, that I'm not quite sure. Is that asking if he'd run and not won?
Right.
He'd
Or if he hadn't dropped out.
Oh.
By dropping out, if the strategy, I guess, works and Harris wins.
Oh. Well, yeah, then I suppose, that's Cincinnatus, the Roman general who won a war basically and then went home to his farm. That was George Washington was called the Cincinnatus, father of his country during his lifetime, and people talked about Cincinnatus all the time in relation to George Washington, who won a war and then went back to his plantation, and then was president for 2 terms, could have run for a third, went back to his plantation. And that gets back to part of what inspired me to talk about what I'm talking about. Men surrendering power is a big deal, right? Particularly men with a lot of power. They don't do that readily. And I realize that's a broad sweeping statement. But there's a reason why there aren't a lot of presidents who have done particularly this kind of surrender of power. So yeah, I mean, if I guess right now, no matter who wins, he might be considered a Cincinnatus because of what he did, stepping back, giving up power. Guys, I want you to be nice to each other. you're not getting mean yet, but I can feel the temperature growing up. We love everyone in this community. Uh, so please, folks, um, be nice.
Yeah.
We can talk this out. We can make things questions. But I'm so proud of this community. I'm always proud of this community. We need to live up to who we are. Okay, I'll stop.
Absolutely. Okay, Linda, our good friend Linda Krause asks, according to Heather Cox Richardson, your good friend, a groundswell from the masses has been what saved us from serious trouble all throughout history. Linda says, I always thought she meant people in the streets protesting and demanding that we won't take this anymore. Her question is, have we ever been saved by a positive outpouring of support for a candidate, or has it always been negative denials of something to cause mass action?
Well, I mean, saved is an interesting word. Um, I think I think this is going to answer the question. I think sometimes, yes, it's a swelling of opinion against something, protesting something that has a big outcome. But actually, I had little notes on this in my notes, and I didn't go into it so much. But there have been moments, not so much, I think, in the middle of someone's presidency necessarily, although John Adams had a popularity moment during the quasi-war with France, because he was like, France shall not insult us. And Americans liked that message so much that they were cheering him and supporting him. And we know this because John Adams, in his writings, was thrilled that for the first time in his life, he was getting cheered. It never happened. But, that kind of upswell of popular sentiment and having it register, I thought of, a handful of examples, but it wasn't in the middle of a campaign. It was the rising. Well, first I thought of George Washington. I was sitting here preparing, thinking, where have there been like, hoo-ha and parades and fanfare and this kind of an upswell? Well, when Washington became president, there was that. There were parades and banners and flowers and people, of all kinds were very excited. Of course, that was because in part it was George Washington and in part because he was the first president. But there was that kind of popular upswell. Another moment where that became, so he was the first president. Then you had that kind of feeling with the rise of Andrew Jackson, because he was kind of a common man president, or so he pitched himself, a white common man president. And again, that felt new and it felt different. And there was an outpouring of sentiment. I think I talked maybe last week or the week before about the guy at the center of the last book I wrote, The Field of Blood, who is a New Hampshire Jacksonian Democrat, and he goes into a town and sees Jackson arrive, and you can read in his diary entry he's beside himself. Look, it's Jackson, the cheering crowds, Ah! So there have been moments when, and not always the first, but in this case, people who stood out as really being something that isn't the norm, and so some people felt represented in a way they hadn't before. Those are moments when people come up and have a lot of opinion. But it is true that protest, skilled, organized protest, can have a um, impact. In a sense, so far, Kamala Harris was attacked for her laughter. And in a sense, we have an angry campaign, and then this other campaign in which people are just happy and laughing. I don't know sort of what I'll say about this, but I guess I'll pause there with that question and say protest is stronger, protest gets more attention, but sometimes popularity in the public voice actually really does have a lot of power. I do want to mention one thing, which I think I gathered in glancing over why there was a little bit of a moment when people got a little peeved. I think it was because I talked about Cincinnatus and George Washington and Biden. And I want to say this because I got a little reaction online for this as well. And I want to make it clear what I am and am not saying. I'm not saying that President Biden is George Washington. I don't think, and you would know, right? I've always said here that there is no founder blob. There's no founder blob. There's not one big blob of founders who are all, wonderful guys. And There aren't. And I think that comparing modern day people to the founders in that way isn't useful. So that wasn't what I was saying. What I was saying is that being a man who gives up power has an impact. And Washington became famous for that. And that was the Cincinnati story. And Biden has done the same thing. But I'm not saying that he is our George Washington. I wouldn't, that's not the kind of thing I would do with the founding folk. I don't want to glorify them, and I don't want to modernize them, and I don't want to use them out of historical context. Okay. Anyway.
All right, we've still got lots of questions. Okay, so KT, a longtime friend, says Republicans are still focused on seizing power by using changes that they've made at the state level regarding electors and the Supreme Court. According to Project 2025 leader Keith Roberts, we're winning in ways the other side doesn't yet know. We're not going to tell you everything that's coming. Get ready to fight. That's kind of ominous. Has there ever before been such a blatant effort to subvert the American democratic process? Are there any safeguards that could be used other than just vigilance?
Well, that's a good question. I did see that yesterday. I chose to say nothing about it yet because it's a threat. And part of the power of a threat is that it gets spread around and it makes people scared and they back away. And I don't know what that means. It's ominous sounding. I think, again, I hate to like, let me talk about the future. I would say a lot of what we've been seeing in recent years, and we're going to see a lot of it coming up, is people in one way or another trying to twist our free and fair electoral system. And now we have the Supreme Court that's kind of been brought into the middle of things in a political way at this highly politicized partisan moment when democracy is threatened. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that threat means, but it is of this moment in which people are, and again, these are folks on the right, are openly saying, we don't really care very much about democracy, right? I think Trump said, I don't care about your votes. I got a lot of votes. That's not a good thought. just saying, I got a lot of votes. I don't care about votes. Well, votes is us. Right? We're the ones who give power. So that's not a good statement. So, a lot of what we're seeing now and what we will continue to see, and I don't know what that statement meant, that threat, but we're going to see people trying to get in the way of the normal operation of our democratic political system. And the question is, what's going to happen? How is it going to happen? How will people respond? What kind of guardrails are up? What kind of guardrails will be ignored? And I do not have the answers to those questions, but that's where we are. Right, you guys, man, I glance over, I'm like, childless. I see people talking about childless. That's another thing, right? I mean, so here's the thing. We have a historic candidate on the left. We have a president stepping down, and then we have this vice presidential candidate who says basically childless women shouldn't have the right to vote because they have no stake in society. Childless cat ladies, I think is what he said, childless cat women, or these like people who are miserable with their lives, how do I want to put this? Forgive me, I can't think of a more stupid way to campaign than to attack women, single women, that in that way. You can say, well, I don't think women should have this right or that right. It's horrible and we should fight against it. But to basically say people who have no children are miserable and they don't deserve to vote, like that's such an extreme statement that it's almost unbelievable. But so yeah, so put that into this moment when Kamala Harris, right? When I said before that there's been a sort of desire to have a voice and a sense of being stepped on, and she's, in a sense, given people a sense that they might have a voice. Toss that into the mix, right? That at that same moment, there's a vice presidential candidate who says, people without kids, women without kids, uh, basically they're not citizens. They don't get to vote. They don't matter. I honestly, right, right. Katya says childless bird woman. I did. I think on one of the social media platforms, I listed myself as childless bird lady.
Childless Bird Lady is a new band name. Somebody had
That
that.
is. I can't remember which one I put it on. Um,
Oh,
but that being said, in this particular moment, couldn't highlight to a greater degree some of what I'm talking about here as to what this moment means and the ways in which it's not just divisions, it's not just, we're way past polarization. These are two very different visions of what the United States should be. And one of those visions is not democratic, is not grounded on democracy. And if their main candidates are saying that things like women without children shouldn't be able to vote, they are handing you that message as a gift. So I think Biden said something along those lines, right? We have two very different visions of what America is going to be, and we are going to vote for one. That's where we are. It's speaking as a historian, um, for those who are new here, I have like historian brain and then Joanne Freeman citizen brain. Historian brain, I can't get enough of this moment because it's fascinating and different, and there are all kinds of, if not precedents being set, then unexpected weird combinations, and we honestly don't know what's coming. American citizen brain is sort of um part of this moment of feeling that I have more of a voice than I had a few days ago, and that this campaign now, there's hope in the campaign that wasn't there before, and also understands that this is such a moment of, I said this on CNN, such a moment of extreme contingency, which I've said 892 million times on History Matters. Such a moment of extreme contingency where we truly do not know what's coming next. That can be unsettling, to say the least. And so we're living in that kind of a moment too.
all right. Gloria, hi, Gloria, asks, to what extent is the transformation, she has that in quotes, is the transformation manipulated by Democratic propaganda and money raised? Was it planned for as they pressured Biden into not running again?
Well, I've been saying to myself, I guess, and maybe once or twice online, we don't fully know what happened behind the scenes. The impression that the press gave was that they were not hoping for Kamala Harris, right? It wasn't like people were saying Kamala. We those weeks when the press, the mainstream press, people on pundits on the left were saying, Biden has to step down, Biden has to step down, and that was like a drumbeat. Part of that drumbeat wasn't Kamala Harris is the person. If you remember, you go back and look at that discussion, there are any number of other white men being tossed in as great contenders. Gavin Newsom, I don't have the whole list. So to me, based on what I could see from my outsider point of view, it does not appear that there was stuff behind the scenes so that Kamala Harris would be the person. I don't know that. And as a historian, I want evidence and I want facts. Um, I would say, what's going on now, I think if you say we're going to have an evening on Zoom where you should come and support Kamala Harris and 100,000 people show up, I don't feel that that's manipulation. No one had to come, and there was nothing they gained by coming, and they weren't told to be there because if they didn't, horrible things would happen. It was just a moment. So, propaganda can come in many forms in many different ways. But propaganda is deliberate and has a very specific intent. And right now, what I'm seeing more on the left is confusion and an attempt to pull together a message. To me, it does not look like there's a set propaganda campaign going on the left. There's confusion on the right now too. There's a lot of out and out lying on the right. And I'm just going to say it, when I was on TV and I was desperately trying I didn't want to both sides something, but I also didn't want to be that blunt on national TV. But there's a lot of lying, and we know that on the right now. You call that propaganda if you like, but that's not something that's happening to an equal degree on both sides. So these are two very different campaigns that are being run, and I think when we use words like propaganda, we have to think about precisely what we mean and precisely how we can or can't pin that on the behavior happening on the left and the right.
All right, this has been crazy fast in the chat and crazy fast in the Q&A. Okay, Beth Lomnitzer, if I'm pronouncing that right. Beth, I don't know if you're new to us, but I don't remember seeing you in the Q&A before, so welcome. It says the only recent vice president to be elected as president while still, holding that office, she thinks was George Bush Sr. in 1988. She wonders, what do you think post January 6th? Does this present any kind of new or different danger, since if it's close like it was last time with Mike Pence, it would be Vice President Harris to certify the election?
I mean, that's right. So that's one of those things that I have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, that, formally speaking, I suppose that's a moment that could happen.
Okay, I think Joanne's frozen and not me. I think someone just confirmed that in the chat. Claire, is that correct?
Oh no.
Is Joanne frozen on your screen?
Yep.
Okay, I thought it was me because sometimes I can't tell if it's me, but my head's moving, so I think it's Joanne.
Wait, you
So
be
hopefully-
Joanne, I'll be Andy.
Yeah. Okay, well, hopefully she will log out and log back in. Let me try texting her.
It looks like
Talk amongst
she's out.
yourselves in the chat, kids. And I don't know, Joanne doesn't usually check her text very often, so I'm not sure if this method will work, but I'll
This might
try.
be the time that she does it. Man, have we ever had this many participants?
Have I ever what?
Have you ever had this many participants? There's so many people here.
We have had a lot, like in the very beginning of the pandemic, it was, yeah, we have 139 people. We had like 150, 175 sometimes at the very beginning. It's been a while since we've had over 100, I think. But this is a very extraordinary week. So, yeah.
I was so excited.
Okay. Someone says go old school and try calling her. I really hope she gets back. Because we have a surprise for everybody in the after party, but I'm not going to say what it is, but Claire's letting us have a surprise guest during the after party. I'm so excited. Okay, is that Joanne? All right, I'm going to try calling. I hope it's not like some kind of a weird outage in New York.
Do you see, somebody said I can just see her obliviously talking to me.
No, it went straight to voicemail.
I don't know.
Oh, she says she's gonna have to restart her computer because Zoom won't let her in. Okay, I'm telling her, okay, we are here. Oh my gosh. Can you edit this part out later? I think we should leave it in. I think it's part of the historical record.
No, I'm gonna be on the YouTube. I'm never on the YouTube because I press record and then I'm out. So this is my
yeah. That's so funny.
Oh yeah, maybe it was an update.
I don't know.
What was the question they were talking about? I was eating a bagel.
Oh, the question that she was on was finishing Beth's question about Kamala Harris being the one that would certify the election the way Mike Pence had to last time. She was in the middle of it.
Oh man.
And Henry says the Electoral Reform Act of 2022 codifies the VP role as presiding officer in certifying election is purely ceremonial.
Okay.
Gotcha. Thank you, Henry. Seems like we have some new folks here, maybe just people who've joined in, but I see new names in the Q&A this week, which I love.
Yeah, I don't know that I heard Joanne say, like, we have a robust community. If, you know, we're all gonna give you a big welcome if you say that you're new. So if you're new,
Yeah,
you wanna
and
know.
if you just joined us or you've been coming for a few weeks but not, you know, been really vocal, we do have a Slack community, which is like an online platform where people stay in touch during the week. So if you would like to be connected to folks in this group throughout the week, if you just type the word Slack, SLACK, in all caps, that's how I skim through and spot it in the chat when we disconnect. Slack, your first and last name and your email. I can add you after we disconnect today, and that way you're in Slack and can hang out with us during the week. And it's a fun group, very friendly. We have some side threads where there's a needle arts group that loves sewing and all things
Oh,
handicrafts. There's a teacher lounge for some of us teachers. So it's a fun group if you're interested. If not, just join us every Friday. And somebody mentioned bingo. We used to have bingo cards every week, but that kind of tapered off in recent months. Every once in a while, if Clinton's around, he'll make one. But I think, you know, it just kind of ran its course.
You want me to be the bingo guy? We can have a new bingo era.
Yeah. I mean, if somebody wants to make the bingo cards, it's a really simple platform we've used. It's free. So
Such a cute thing that the community did.
yeah, it's a fun community. So
Yeah.
yeah,
There's
there's time for bingo because the chat's on fire. That's right. It's just been
Was
like
the chat this fast even at the beginning?
it really depended on the week. You know, the first year and a half, I was just in the chat with everybody else. People that worked at NCHE, first Matt and then Grace, the former director, became moderator. And then when they were kind of in between directors before Jessica was hired, that's when there was kind of this gap, and that's how I became moderator. And then Joanne said, "Can we just keep Annie?" So that's what we did.
That's a pretty good compliment. Oh, she's
Yeah.
back.
Oh yeah.
Hello.
Okay, that was historic.
That was
never
what we were
happened.
just saying.
That's never happened.
Yeah, that was pretty crazy.
It like threw me off, and then it said I had no internet. It was that was, as far as history matters, that was unprecedented.
Yeah.
At any rate, okay, now I'm back and I lost track of where we were, but we can.
Okay. We'll start with a fresh question because I'm not
Okay.
sure where we were either. Okay. So this one comes from Barbara. She wanted to say, she said she wasn't surprised that 45 listened to his sons on who to pick for VP. Do you think that, and she says TFG, I'm not sure who.
The former guy?
The former guy, oh, maybe, will use Biden being replaced by Harris and replace Vance. Yep, that's who it is.
Oh, okay.
So do you think he will now drop Vance after making the big announcement just a week ago? Or be kind of stuck with Vance, even though Vance has made these cat lady comments and other nonsense?
I have no idea. I mean, you know, allow me to say, like, he needs an actual reason to do anything, right? Like, he's looked for some rational rule-bound reason. He could, right? He could say, well, now the terrain has changed and I need to change because they changed everything. You know, certainly there's a lot of talk about the fact that Vance might not be the ideal candidate.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, so that could be another thing that might happen that we might see very soon. Is that there might be a different vice presidential candidate. I have no idea. You know, a lot of what he's saying is sort of project 2025-ish. And, you know, in some cases, Trump has been trying to back away, saying, well, I don't know anything about Project 2025. And if I recall correctly, Vance wrote a forward to Project 2025 in one case. So anyway, it's complicated. So I'm not even going to guess, but could be. And that would be one argument I suppose you could make.
Yeah. Gosh, we've got 13 questions still in the chat. It's crazy. But our good friend Francesca from across the pond says, the most astounding thing has been the speed with which people have rallied around Vice President Harris. She asked, is this unprecedented?
Well, so now I'm going to be a historian. I won't say unprecedented. I will say it's extraordinary. The amount of time, a matter of days, even just the first day, right? I can't even describe how surprising and extreme that is. Now, I want to say a version of an argument I've made here before, and to me, this is yet another example of it. I'm going to get on my technology and democracy hobby horse here. So I've talked about before how democracy is a conversation between people with power and we, the people who give it to them. And that any technology that shapes that conversation shapes democracy. So I've written about how the telegraph did that. Radio did that in some ways. TV, think about civil rights, that did that. President Obama, when he ran and he was like, I was getting, emails from Obama, like, hey, and I remember thinking the president's emailing me and I know he isn't, but I've never seen anything like this before. I'm beginning to use social media. Then we had a tweeting president, right? And all of the complication that had. Now we have Zoom and TikTok. I don't know anything about TikTok, but just let's talk for the moment about Zoom, right? Zoom, born really of the pandemic as far as something that has power and is a way of having conversation. And Zoom is how you end up with 100,000 people on a Thursday night coming together, right? So social media all by itself dramatically changes democracy because in a nanosecond, something could be circulated around the world and warped and rewarped and sent back. And, the speed with which social media works and the ease with which foreign powers and anybody else can climb in and mess with it. That's a major complication in and of itself. But I think Zoom is part of what's particularly interesting about this moment because, if it were like 50 years from now and I was writing about this campaign, I would want to know what the Harris campaign people were doing behind the scenes to prepare for this moment and to work through it, because they appear to be doing a really skillful job at doing things like using Zoom and, making ads and like technological things. But anyway, I do think that social media and Zoom are contributing to, and both of them together, not just social media, are contributing to the fact that the upswell of support in such a short amount of time. It's partly pent up anger on the part of women in this particular moment, and it's partly technology giving that voice and giving that vent. I don't think that's the full explanation for what we're seeing now, but I think that's a big chunk of it.
Yeah, well, this kind of segues nicely into Jenny G's question. And I went to go see Suffs last week when I was in New York. So this goes right on with it. So if y'all haven't seen it, it's fantastic. She says, many of the daughters and nieces taken to the polls in 2016 are now 8 years older. Think of how many of those little girls are now young women old enough to vote, like the women's suffrage movement, when men tried to dismiss women involved in the notion of women having a voice, being able to participate. Do you feel like there's similarities in this energy and the women's suffrage movement? I love that question, John.
Oh, interesting. What a great question.
Great question. You win, I think.
Yeah, that might be the best question. And the answer could be, possibly yes. I've been thinking a lot in recent days about younger folk in this moment. Some of them who have never experienced this kind of moment, maybe some of them remember what happened when Obama was coming up as a candidate and was elected. There was a kind of euphoria then, but maybe not. And before that, what was another kind of popular moment of that sort? I was thinking about that this morning, that brought a kind of sweep of joy and a popular outburst. There hasn't been a lot of it in the recent past. So for one thing, younger people have not seen this before. And you're right. For another thing, they've been seeing a certain kind of politics. And yes, what they've been seeing very well may shape their feeling about what they're being denied and what they need to fight for and what they deserve. And their context, their historical context, is entirely different from ours, meaning ancient people like me. So for young folk in this moment, I think that's another component that makes this distinctive, because they are seemingly engaged in this moment and responding to this moment and feeling it in a way that they might not have experienced politics before. And in that sense, yeah, the suffragette movement and the fuel and the fire that pushed the suffragette movement could be some of what we're feeling here. It's totally true. Now, of course, the suffragette movement, there were Black women at the head of that movement who were ignored by white women, suffragette movement. And I would seemingly think that that would not happen now. I think hopefully we've learned our lesson, and that doesn't happen, particularly with a Black and South Asian candidate. But as far as the fuel behind the moment and the younger people really firing it, we need to watch. But my eye is on how younger people are engaging with this moment, because that's a whole different demographic, which has been kind of just, seemingly detached in many ways, or at least many of them, from either candidate. Like, I'm not going to vote. I've heard a lot of, not so much among college students, but, or the college students I see, but I've heard, murmurings of, I don't really care. I don't know if I'm going to vote. And again, young people, I suspect, are going to be feeling differently now.
Yeah, I had put in the chat earlier, David Hogg is one of the young men who's a survivor of the Parkland school shooting in Florida. And a couple of years ago, he started a political action committee to only support candidates under the age of 35 and younger. And so they've been successful in state and local elections around the country. They've given seed money to these candidates. And he came out in a big way this week for Vice President Harris, and they've galvanized a lot of voter registrations for young people, and he's throwing a lot of his support. I've been impressed with him as a person the last few years, the way he's taken a great tragedy and turned it into something useful to try,
and has taken the moment to have a voice. I agree.
It is 11:05. Of course, there's a million questions still.
A million questions. Why don't we take another one or two since I vanished?
Right.
We can go to the after party.
All right. So Kathleen asks, Trump seems to mirror Putin's propaganda, which according to Ann Applebaum states, okay, Russia's corrupt, but so is everyone else. It's an argument of moral equivalence that undermines faith, hope, and belief that we can live up to the language of our Constitution. Have we seen this sort of propaganda pathway in the past?
Repeat that for me. I kind of missed what the question was.
She's wondering, like, with Russia saying, oh, well, it's just Russia, we're just corrupt, that's how it is. Have we gotten, I think what she's asking is, have we gotten to be that moral equivalent where everybody just takes it for granted? Oh, well, this one candidate lies and makes stuff up and just, that's just how it is. We just have to accept it the way it is. Or are we that country now, similar to countries where there's,
well, I've been thinking about that, not in that sense, but until this moment, that's kind of where we were, right? That, well, this is what candidates do, and candidates want to run, and, Trump, like, yeah, he lies all the time. That's what he does, and what he's doing, he's continuing to do, and there's nothing new, so it's not news. And, on the left, they are just doing what they always do, and it's the same old kind of campaign. And what's interesting about the moment now, though, is whereas before you could sort of dismiss the right by saying, well, he's just doing what he always does. Now, in the context of who Trump is potentially up against, it suddenly isn't quite as rote, as cut and dried, right? Suddenly it's like, well, yeah, he does always do that, but it looks a little different now. Right?
Yeah, she was emphasizing that living up to the language of our Constitution.
Yeah.
We still, doesn't undermine the faith, hope, and belief. We can live up to that language. I felt a little hopeful this week that maybe we can.
That's kind of where I was going a little bit with my discussion about this as a sort of democracy moment, right? I have never and will never give up faith in our ability to live up to and improve upon our Constitution and democracy. Like, I believe in our country. I believe in the United States. I believe in the American people. And I believe that we can come together and move ourselves to a better place. Always have, always will, even in the worst moments when I'm really not happy. That doesn't change. And, I by no means think the Constitution is perfect. Even the framers of the Constitution really didn't think it was perfect. But I think it's a great foundation from which to build upon. There's a reason why you can amend it, right? The assumption was it's not going to be the same forever, and so there should be a way to change it. So can we live up to the I don't want to say impulse, to the character of that Constitution and to the process? I talk about that a lot here too, that it sets in motion. It structures a government. It creates a process that we're supposed to be able to go to pull ourselves out of difficulties. I believe it's still there. I believe that in the same way that I think some people fundamentally really don't understand what democracy is. They also fundamentally don't understand what the Constitution does and what it's for. And that's a really big problem. And we've been seeing that again for many years. But I don't think that means that they don't matter. And I don't think that means that they're irrelevant. And I don't think that means we can't live up to what they represent. And we can't find ways to better embody ourselves as a nation in those things.
Yeah. Charles Catalano asks, what does it say about whether our democratic system is working as it should be if we as individuals in a democracy feel heard, primarily when someone like us is in power, or that the presumption of what it takes to be heard fully?
Well, in a sense, that's always been part of the case, right? Is that particularly when the presidency, if the question is about the presidency, then yes, a president is put in power and the president represents one party with one view of what the nation is. And generally speaking, that means some people are going to feel more heard and some people are going to feel less heard and less represented. And yes, that's true. On the other hand, Congress, remember Congress, right? Our representatives and senators are supposed to be better at representing us. That has never been perfect. That has never been a perfect process. But I think in recent years, and I'm not going to be able to put my finger on what year it is, but there was a chunk of time. Do you remember when it might have been when healthcare was being debated and candidates, representatives and senators just weren't having town hall meetings anymore? Because they didn't want to have to stand up and deal with everybody being angry. I think it was healthcare that people were upset about. And I remember thinking, well, that's a really bad impulse. Let's just hide from the public because we don't want to talk about this because it's really ugly. That felt to me like stepping away from what you're supposed to be doing as a member of Congress, which is representing your constituents, hearing what they want and engaging with them. So that comes and goes. I think that the phrase representation matters, and that's usually discussed, used in a way that has to do with race or gender, that if you don't see yourself in people on TV or in people with power, you can't imagine yourself being that. So that form of representation matters. But I also think in a political way, that matters too. And, if you really feel unrepresented, truly unrepresented, that's a moment when you have to find a way to work to change your representative or change the system to gain representation, because our system is based on that. Accountability gets us back to accountability, folks. Yet another. I talk about contingency all the time. I talk about accountability all the time. At the heart of democracy, the people with power are accountable to us. That's the core of representation.
Yeah.
I guess maybe we should go to the after party so we can have an after party. I hate to cut this off.
We have a surprise for you during the after party, so we definitely want to get to the after party.
Okay, well, let me explain what happens next. And it might be, who the heck knows what's going to happen this week. And if it's still part of this trend, we might, I'm going to actually ask Claire to do what she's done before. And that is when we're done to send the questions, the leftover questions. Because all of you, I could see all of you saying, poof, poof. Yeah, so let me explain what happened. So what's going to happen now is we are going to go to the after party. What that means is that we will no longer be recording the discussion, so we can be even freer and easier than we are with our general discussion. If you beamed in through the NCHE website, all you need to do is stay right where you are and poof, you will be in the after party. If you are watching on Facebook, you need to leave Facebook and go to ncheteach.org/conversations. That's ncheteach.org/conversations. So before we make the poof and go to the after party, I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank everyone here for engaging in the conversation of democracy, which I say every week, but this week it feels particularly relevant. This community is a community. And the fact that we're here and we've been doing this for 226 weeks is remarkable all by itself. I appreciate the newcomers who came for this. I hope some of you will come back, because I'd say, except for the fact that I got thrown off Zoom, this is pretty typical of what our conversations are like. And, we do not all agree. And that to me is a strength of us, right? That we should be able to be in groups of people who do not all agree with each other. So at any rate, I want to thank the community for being here and proving that the process of democracy and democratic representation, communication, engagement in the democratic process goes on. I want to thank Annie and Claire and Jessica and John and NCHE for making this possible week after week after week after week. And I guess all I can say before we go poof is, folks, just keep your eyes on what's happening. I don't have to say that, I realize. But, sometimes history happens really quickly. This is a moment where I feel like I'm tap dancing to keep up with what's going on, in a good way, right? Because I feel a sense of hope, and I haven't felt hope. And I didn't realize I didn't realize what I had or hadn't been feeling until everything changed. And then suddenly it was like, oh, I feel differently. Okay. I will now, I'm a little scared at what's
Oh, no,
gonna
you're gonna love it. It's gonna be super fun.
Okay.
Waiting for Claire to turn off the recording in the Facebook.